From 1492 forward, this Eurocentric worldview enabled conquest, enslavement, and the building of empires, the expansion of control in Africa, and genocide in the Americas, and exploitation of the global South. And in concert with this was a Eurocentric church and a Eurocentric theology that justified this quote-unquote development and the industrialization that ensued. White folks' primary identity in this industrialized world became not as lovers of creation, in awe with the natural processes that make life and survival possible, but rather as consumers. The dollar became the primary tool of trade, and the natural world became commodified. This worldview was then spread out of the global north through trade and military might into the global south. And that's why today's dominant empire has more than 800 military bases located in 70 countries across the world. And that military, by the way, is the largest single emitter of greenhouse gases on the planet. People cleared forest for cultivation. People dammed rivers to control water, created cities on models of consumption. Wildness was tamed. Biodiversity be damned. The web of life be damned. The sacred cats that once roamed these hills, honored by the Creek Indians in mystical and spiritual lore, gone. And where was the church? Where was the witness to God's presence in the world? Well, the church approved it. Just like the church approved slavery, just like the church approved the subjugation of women. A patriarchal theology focused on individual human salvation, a relationship with a male God who is up in the heavens, not here among us, within us, and within the forest and streams and rivers and owls. Wildness was tamed with a sterile, oppressive theological worldview. Now, there were exceptions. And we can think about the black church in the history of this land. The church of resistance to the forces of empire, to the forces of enslavement in colonial times. They created their own code language developed on plantations, wise as serpent and innocent as doves. They knew who their real master and Lord was, and they recognized their dependency upon God's creation for survival, upon the wildness of creation, out of gratitude, out of a drive to survive. They grew their own vegetables, hunted their own food, caught their own fish to supplement what the slave master didn't provide. And they created a spirituality and a theology of resistance that paralleled their physical survival. They worshiped late at night and out of earshot of the plantation master. They worshiped their real master and Lord, the Lord of creation. But the earthly masters and lords, well, we know, they persisted. And all of that development leads us to where we are today. So we are now in the throes of the planet's 6th mass extinction event. And while we are so very blessed, so very lucky to live in this beautiful, beautiful part of the world called Georgia, with this amazing spring weather that we're having, too much of the world is living in recovery from wildfires that destroyed everything, to people who are still living in tents after the aftermath of hurricanes that came up through the Gulf of Mexico, to Mozambique, which is now going through another cyclone back to back as we speak. As Al Gore and Reverend Dr. William Barber stated so clearly at a conference that I was able to attend back in March, we and the planet as we know it are in grave danger. The Earth's thermostat, otherwise known as the ice caps, are melting at breakneck speed. The oceans are rising. Coastal communities are having to move. New York City has already committed $10 billion to construct dams and edifices to try to keep the rising sea levels at bay. So as Paul says in the book of Romans, the whole creation groans in birthing pains. Wild animal populations have dropped 60% since 1970 60%. That is astounding. Just in my lifetime. Sir David Attenborough of the UK, the narrator of the wildlife documentary series Our Planet, perhaps some of you have heard about it, he points out that 96% of the mass of mammals on the planet today is us and the livestock that we've domesticated. 4% is everything else. That includes elephants and badgers and owls and tigers and bats. So that is the exact opposite composition of what we read this morning from the book of Genesis. Noah and his family were the minority of God's salvation plan. The rest were colorful, vibrant, non-human animals. Wildness. Bless the hearts of Noah and Noah's family being on that ark with all those wild animals. It must have been a little bit stinky.
A little bit.
A little bit. But that's the sacrifice they made to respond to God's call. They got dirty. They got messy. And so today, with those with the least political power bear the brunt of the destruction of God's creation. The toxic waste and air pollution that come from coal-burning power plants and nuclear power plants. Those behemoths are more often than not placed near black communities or Latino communities. Toxic waste sites like Atlanta's largest landfill, they're not placed in the northern suburbs of Atlanta, but in South DeKalb County, in South Fulton County. Blacks and Latinos are disproportionately exposed to toxicity and air pollution, to asthma, cancer, and untimely death. And as a hospice chaplain, this is my full-time ministry, working primarily with low-income African Americans, I see this every day. So let me say here for a moment that if you have a history of depression, believe you me, these facts and information is not good medicine. When I tell my doctor about these things, he just kind of gives me that look. But I'd like to say, too, that if we don't understand or acknowledge the freight and weight of these heavy realities, we cannot appreciate and live fully the power of God's promising resurrection through the Lord of creation, Jesus the Christ. For God so loved the world, the whole created order, the cosmos, that he gave his only Son, to show clearly a truth that is already and always fleshed throughout the created order. God's resurrection love is embedded through all of creation, and it is wild, it is resistant, it is persistent. Paul says as much when he writes, Christ was the firstborn of creation, and not one thing was created apart from him. That gospel resurrection love is shot through all of creation. Now, what is all of this? Thanks for hanging in there. Y'all doing great. Now, what does all this have to do with today's gospel lesson? We hear Thomas the disciple, otherwise known as Doubting Thomas. He's gotten a bad rap for not believing apart from seeing tangible proof of Jesus' resurrection. But really, don't we appreciate Thomas? Don't we want to see proof at times as well? Thomas wants to see some evidence that there's a new force in town, a renewed sign of hope to continue in the struggle, to bring the beloved community into existence. He wants to see a new sign that indeed we can do on earth as it is in heaven. On earth as it is in heaven. A new sign that we will have life and have it in abundance. A new sign that we too can do greater things. And it's that same love, that same passion that undergirds all of God's creation. And that's why the yellow wildflower pops up from a crack in the sidewalk, for example. We pave over the rich topsoil. We deprive it of water and oxygen and sunlight. We roll a stone over that dark cave, if you will. And miraculously, unbelievably, that little stem makes its way past the concrete, avoids pedestrians stepping on it, and pops up pops this little yellow flower. This little word of God in the flesh, to smile at us, to enjoy its simply being, to spread the truth of the gospel, the truth of the resurrection. You can't keep me down. Maya Angelou said it best, right? Still like dust, I'll rise. Yeah. And rise up the creation is. Brothers and sisters, all around the world, people are waking up to God's salvific wildness, to resurrection. Greta Thunberg, for example, the 16-year-old from Sweden, she began a walkout from school every Friday to protest her government's slow action on climate change. And just in the last year, thousands of students started to follow her, and she started a global movement. On Friday, March 15th of this year, she led the Global Youth Climate Strike, where teenagers from 125 nations walked out of school, went to their places of government to protest and demand a call on strong climate action. We had students from Decatur High who participated in that. And they were calling on their respective governments to take radical action to address the global climate emergency. And even my own niece, Sarah, who's with us here today, she joined in that as well. And she left her school on that Friday afternoon and was down at the Capitol with the other students. And I thought that was pretty impressive too, because the Jenkins family doesn't have much of a history of social protest. So I was pretty excited about that.